Hey everyone, this is a piece titled The Proletariat and Revolution. It's a section from Baruch Knei-Paz's The Social and Political Thought of Leon Trotsky. It's from the chapter of the book on a permanent revolution. So, here we go. In a backward society, torn between the contradictions of past and present, a revolution which is national in scope is impossible. The main classes, separated by the social cleavages of backwardness, cannot unite behind an agreed revolutionary program. The revolution, Trotsky believed, will therefore triumph as a class revolution, or the revolution will not triumph at all. Footnote: Trotsky agreed with Plekhanov's well-known statement that the victory of the Russian proletariat was possible only as a revolutionary victory, or not at all. See his 1907 speech to the Fifth London Congress of the Russian Social Democratic Labour Party. End footnote. In that case, however, the class standing at the head of the revolution must be powerful enough to withstand not only the regime it seeks to overthrow, but the social forces which cling to that regime and which will rally to that regime's defense. Was the proletariat in Russia sufficiently significant to confront the rest of society? Here Trotsky raised again the question of the weight of numbers. Did its minority status contradict the proletariat's potential as a revolutionary force? Must this potential come to fruition only when the proletariat in Russia reached the proportions of its counterpart in the advanced countries of the West? That is, only when Russia herself had been turned, presumably, into a fully modern industrial nation? In reply to these questions, Trotsky again pointed to the peculiar features of the Russian conditions when compared either with the past or present of the West. Mere numbers, Trotsky argued, were misleading. Statistics said nothing about the nature of the categories which they formally defined. Percentages and proportions did not exhaust the possibilities of relations. The importance of the proletariat was only partly a function of numbers. It was, rather, more a function of its social character. This character was in turn the product of the industrial and geographical milieu in which the worker found himself and of the economic position he occupied. In Russia, since industry was erected not from industry's foundations but from industry's highest forms, the worker was immediately thrown into the most technologically advanced environment. This happened while the rest of the population remained at its previously low level. Thus, in relation to that population, the worker's importance rose out of proportion to his numbers. Similarly, the worker found himself in the modern city whose industrial and commercial character bore no resemblance to the larger countryside, but whose resultant strategic importance could not be measured by its relative numbers only. The Russian worker's environment, therefore, coincided with the most advanced features of Russian society, insofar as the Russian worker's environment was, insofar as it was these features which must eventually predominate, their force expressed the force of the worker. Quote, ... It is clear that the importance of a proletariat, given identical numbers, increases in proportion to the amount of productive forces which it sets in motion. That is to say, a worker in a large factory is all, other things being equal, of greater social magnitude than a handicraft worker, and an urban worker of greater magnitude than a country worker. In other words, the political role of the proletariat is the more important in proportion as large-scale production dominates small production. Industry dominates agriculture, and the town dominates the country. If we take the history of Germany, or of England in the period when the proletariat of these countries formed the same portion of the nation as the proletariat now forms in Russia, we shall see that they not only did not play, but by their objective importance could not play, such a role as the Russian proletariat plays today. End quote. Trotsky, Results and Prospects. Footnote: In the History of the Russian Revolution, Book 1, Trotsky wrote, quote, England achieved her Puritan Revolution when England's whole population was not more than 5.5 million, of whom 500,000 were to be found in London. France, in the epoch of her revolution, had in Paris only 500,000 out of a population of 25 million. Russia at the beginning of the 20th century had a population of about 150 million, of whom more than 3 million were in Petrograd and Moscow. Behind these comparative figures lurk enormous social differences. Not only England of the 17th century, but also France of the 18th, had no proletariat in the modern sense. In Russia, however, the working class in all branches of labor, both city and village, numbered in 1905 no less than 10 million, which with their families amounts to more than 25 million. That is to say, more than the whole population of France in the epoch of the Great Revolution. Advancing from the sturdy artisans and independent peasants of the army of Cromwell, through the sans-culottes of Paris, to the industrial proletarians of St. Petersburg, the revolution had deeply changed its social mechanism, its methods, and therewith its aims. End quote. Trotsky. The figure of 10 million, which Trotsky gives as the number of Russian workers in 1905, is, of course, misleading, since it includes many categories which hardly fit the description of, quote, proletarian. The actual figure is probably closer to 3 million, though this does not necessarily affect Trotsky's argument. End footnote. It followed, therefore, according to Trotsky, that, quote, the attempt to define in advance what proportion of the whole population must be proletarian at the moment of the conquest of political power is a fruitless task. End quote. Trotsky, Logic and Results and Prospects. But even more significant in Trotsky's view was the strategic location of the workers vis-a-vis the economic structure, the workers' potential, which the workers had confirmed in 1905, to paralyze industry, and the workers' potential equally, also at least partially confirmed, to dominate urban centers. But beyond these elements there was a further factor, which Trotsky viewed as a kind of advantage arising from backwardness. This was the non-capitalist nature of Russian industry, which, far from arguing for the weakness of the Russian proletariat, in fact was the real source of its revolutionary potential. To show why this was so, Trotsky compared the development of Russian industry with that of the West. The experience in the West showed, in Trotsky's view, that where industry had been built through capitalism, there the bourgeoisie had been able to attain power which was out of all proportion to the bourgeoisie's numerical inferiority, since the capitalist framework had given it the means by which to dominate the whole structure of society, to impose upon it a way of life which extends beyond the purely economic. Assimilated into this capitalist socio-cultural framework, the proletariat in the West, for the time being at least, had not been able to exploit its superior numbers in accordance with objective proportions. In Russia, however, a different picture had emerged. Here, the advance of industry without the capitalist framework left the methods of production exposed. Industry was like the skeleton of a building, so much easier to raise. Thus, in relation to the bourgeoisie, the workers were obviously more powerful, but the point was that they were more powerful in relation to the whole industrial edifice. For the state, though it nourished industry and lived off capitalism, had not and could not itself introduce those socio-cultural elements of capitalism which in the West created political power. In effect, its political power, which was primarily based on a large army, did not embody that economic power which should have been derived from industry. Instead, it was the proletariat which, in a sense by default, inherited this economic power. Industry without capitalism, in short, meant not only a working class without a bourgeoisie, but a working class with the capacity to rule over industry. Trotsky did not conclude, of course, that this comparison implied that the Western proletariat was doomed to be forever ruled by the Western proletariat's capitalist employers. Trotsky did not conclude, of course, that this comparison implied that the Western proletariat was doomed to be forever ruled by the Western proletariat's capitalist employers. On the contrary, in the long run, the proletariat there was more powerful and would assert itself in accordance with its objective strength and proportion as the capitalist system itself, for economic reasons, degenerated. In the short run, however, it was in a country such as Russia that the workers could make themselves felt more forcefully. Quote, "There is no doubt that the numbers, the concentration, the culture and political importance of the industrial proletariat depend on the extent to which capitalist industry is developed. But this dependence is not direct. Between the productive forces of a country and the political strength of the country's classes, there cut across at any given moment various social and political factors of a national and international character, and these displace and even sometimes completely alter the political expression of economic relations. In spite of the fact that the productive forces of the United States are 10 times as great as those of Russia, nevertheless the political role of the Russian proletariat, the Russian proletariat's influence on the politics of its own country, and the possibility of the Russian proletariat's influencing the politics of the world in the near future are incomparably greater than in the case of the proletariat of the United States." End quote. Trotsky, Results and Prospects. Footnote. Trotsky went on to cite an approximately similar comparison of the United States and Russia made by Karl Kautsky. End footnote. Trotsky therefore concluded, in a sentence to which Trotsky would later point as embodying his major prophecy of 1906, that, quote, "In an economically backward country, the proletariat can come to power sooner than a capitalist advanced country," end quote. Trotsky.